Hi, I'm Dr. Shiloh.
And I'm Dr. Scott.
And this is LA Not So Confidential, the forensic psychology and true crime podcast.
Each episode, we explore the intersection of psychology, the criminal justice system, and entertainment.
Today, our episode is on the forensic psych topic of occult allegations in the criminal justice system. Hi, everyone. Welcome back. It's July. Hi, Dr. Scott. You roasting over there yet?
It is heating up. Our squirrels are splooting. We put out water for them, and there's a little shady area on the fence, and two of them are splooted.
So cute.
Trying to cool off. Yeah.
8 years in, we hardly ever don't start an episode without talking about the weather.
I know. Oh my gosh.
Thank you guys for continuing to listen.
Seriously, so much patience with us.
So just real quick off the top, by the time this drops, we still have our last walking tour coming up, which is Sunday, July 20th. Please, if you're thinking about coming, email us, see if there are spots left. As of right now, we do have a few, but if you want to join and you're able to make it on a Sunday evening, let us know. We had a blast with our last group on June 20th, and just what a wonderful tour. Those of you that are coming out to it, it's going to be fantastic. The Sunset Strip, true crime stories from gangsters to horrific murdering duos. Yeah,
cults. and cults and, mafioso gangland stuff. It's Chris, our host, is just, I just can't say enough good things about him. He's so talented.
Kiss. He's great. Yeah. He really is.
Just knows everything. We also want to apologize for one of our recent episodes where we were both so exhausted, and we ended up the recording that came out. Both of us pronounced the word corroborate as coabowate.
Wait, coabowate?
Coabowate. No. And I can't believe I didn't pick up you doing it, and you didn't pick up me doing it.
Did we both do it?
We both did it.
I thought it was just me. Oh my God.
No, it was both of us. It was late in the day. We were possessed by a demonic Elmer Fudd. So see, it's perfect for our occult conversation today.
I see that. Yes. Before we get into it, let's do some recaps.
Yes. So in May, we covered the research on true confessions and false confessions in episode 208. There's not a lot of research on true confessions. I mean, why would there be, right? But we dug up some studies that compared behavioral and linguistic factors, as well as confession strategies. We also covered how investigative interrogations have evolved and what science-based methods are now being used.
And in episode 209, we went behind the couch and interviewed author and former California Assemblyman Mike Gatto about his book Noir by Necessity, which is about the unsolved murder of his father, Joe. Please go back and listen. Mike is hoping that someone will still come forward with information that could lead to an arrest in this mystifying case.
Absolutely. What a great guest, trick and fascinating story. And folks, if you haven't had a chance to listen, please go back and listen and buy his book. Yes. Share it on Kindle. It's really fascinating.
Absolutely. All right. So for today, do we bite off more than we could chew with this topic? It seems really big.
It's big. But I also think that, as we've done in past episodes, and this is some of the really strong positive feedback we've gotten over the years, is that we talk about big concepts. Like, you can really get pulled down the rabbit hole on just one particular factor of a subject. And this is something where we're going to be giving an overview of several different factors in these situations.
Yeah, I feel like this is a topic that people have asked us to do for a while. I mean, probably very early on. And I feel like if we had done this 6 years ago, it would be a totally different episode in a lot of ways.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. The whole context, these type of allegations, these type of confessions, the context has expanded dramatically, and it's crept into so many areas of life here in the U.S., particularly around conspiracy theories and how it's leaked into pretty much every corner of our citizenry life, I really believe. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's like a whole next wave of, what were maybe once the Salem witch trials, and then the satanic panic of the 80s. And now whatever the hell they're going to call this one day, it's just like on fire at this point.
We all make it. In the years that we've been producing this podcast, we refer to the phenomenon of satanic panic and the terrible aftermath of events that have torn apart communities and families around the country and also around the world as we've exported this terrible phenomenon. And as in the saying, life imitates art, we're going to show how, interestingly enough, television and film media played a huge part in the explosion of these accusations. It's not just preschools where these allegations of occult driven crimes have occurred.
While general satanic panic discussions often stop at media hysteria, we are taking the opportunity today to discuss the forensic angles that need some pointed focus. Today, you'll hear us discussing specific mechanisms like memory implantation, confabulation, emotional token economies, and the psychology of authority figures, planting narratives and role confusion among mental health professionals as interrogators. As with our recent episode on false confessions, we're going to build on the discussion of interrogation-induced false confessions and implanted memories, emphasizing that these are not separate phenomenon, but interrelated failures.
Mental health professionals consulting with law enforcement in interrogations is, well, in some instances, it's ethically fraught. And that's coming from me, a mental health professional that worked integrally with law enforcement. And this is an important forensic psychology critique that rarely gets the attention and concern in the bigger mainstream narratives. That being said, forensic psychology contributed to vital changes and reforms in the interview and evaluation process by implementing new protocols for child witnesses and child victims, as well as carefully videotaped interviews and basically a big neon flashing caution sign against recovered memory as evidence.
So today, the trigger warning is going to be for child abuse, allegations of child sexual and ritual assaults and abuse, as well as religious trauma. We are not going into details about any of these, but we know just some of the talk surrounding some of this can be incredibly triggering for folks. So please make sure you guys listen with care. So you all know the cases, right? The McMartin preschool hearings in Southern California, where a mentally ill mother's allegations tore apart a community and implanted false memories in children.
The Faith Chapel case, where a developmentally disabled worker was charged with fantastical blood rituals, including giraffes and elephants.
The Oak Hill preschool case, where allegations led to the imprisonment of the alleged perpetrators until exonerations 2 decades later. And finally,
the West Memphis Three, possibly one of the most famous cases of satanic panic that did involve the still unsolved murder of 3 children.
But first, we start with the concept of moral panic. This event or phenomenon occurs when a person, group, or behavior is portrayed as a major threat to current, existing, or aspirational ideals, societal values, and interests of a particular subgroup, often with little or no factual basis. British sociologist Stanley Cohen originally defined the concept in the 1970s, describing how folk devils are created through exaggerated media coverage, as well as political rhetoric and public fear. Basically, a label for anything that could be a threat to societal values and norms. In psychology, we often link moral panic to a few common concepts. There's the concept of groupthink, where consensus is valued over critical thinking. And then we have confirmation bias, or essentially interpreting information through your own personal lens. And then we have the social amplification of risk to very low risk situations or events. But here's where our particular forensic psychology lens is especially critical. While sociologists highlight group fear, we can focus on the mechanics of memory contamination and coercion in interviews, which few outside our field fully appreciate.
When people feel anxious or uncertain, especially during times of social upheaval, social change, and significant social change cycles absolutely do exist.
Well, I mean, now we just live in it nonstop every day. I wish it was a cycle that had a break, but I feel like...
No, point very well taken. That's fair. Over the last few years, definitely. But when people feel this way, they're more likely to latch on to simplified explanations as well as scapegoats. And in these cases, the anxiety isn't just personal, it becomes a social contagion. And it spreads just like a virus through communities. And it fuels actions that are often irrational and or unjust. Stanley Cohen, a sociologist and criminologist, outlines how the media exaggerates and distorts events no big surprise there, right?
Right.
Which lead to public outcry, policy responses, and stigmatization. And this was all outlined in his foundational work, Folk Devils and Moral Panics. And in the context of the 1980s satanic panic, shows like Geraldo, was it, no, it was Geraldo.
Geraldo.
In the context of the 1980s satanic panic, shows like Geraldo and reports by outlets like 2020 helped validate these unproven claims of widespread ritual abuse, illustrating what researchers Good and Ben Yehuda describe as media amplification spirals. And these lay out how the press not only reflects, but also intensifies moral anxiety, and that often steers public opinion and policy without any reliable evidence.
New England, especially Massachusetts and Connecticut, was the hotspot of witch trials in colonial America around 1690. This was due to Puritan influence and rigid religious ideology. Thankfully, other colonies like Virginia, New York, and Maryland saw fewer trials and tended to treat accusations with more legal restraint. For us in the United States, it's not surprising that we would immediately think of the clearest historical parallels to modern moral panic are these Salem witch trials of 1692. But unlike Europe, where actually thousands were executed around this time, the total number of people executed for witchcraft in colonial America is estimated to be fewer than 30. Still 30 too many.
Right.
And much like the satanic panic of the 1980s and 90s, the Salem trials were driven by collective fear, as well as unverified accusations, lack of reliable evidence, and some horrifically bad investigative work. Even today, the controversies are fanned into the flame by various factions. Just this year, in the state of Georgia, a high school production of The Crucible, a play that step by step lays out the whirlpool of moral panic, was shut down due to school officials claiming the play was demonic. Let that
I
sink in for a second.
it's like such a clown car. I mean, talk about
Yes.
like that's a whole other rabbit hole we could go down about just how frustrating it is that people are choosing ignorance in this, like to take a play like this that is actually supposed to talk about
Yeah. They
the
panicked
impact
about
of
a play about
panic and
panic.
yeah.
Side note, I have to say that the drunk history episode on the Salem witch trials is like one of my favorites.
I haven't seen that in forever. Who was the person that's retelling the story? Do you remember?
Oh my gosh, I don't.
We
Shoot.
should link it. Get to the.
I will
We'll put it in
find
the
it.
show notes.
I will find it.
Okay.
So both the panic of the 17th and 20th centuries fixated on the idea of hidden evil infiltrating everyday life, whether through witchcraft in colonial New England or satanic cults supposedly operating in daycares and businesses and suburban homes next door. In both eras, you have two essential similarities. One, young people were central to the accusations. And then two, the authority figures. You have the clergy back then as prosecutors, and then wildly incompetent therapists in modern day. And what this did is it helped legitimize the panic. We talked all about some of that phenomenon in episode 52, which was on authority and influence and active bystandership, but those were really essential in these cases. A broader sociological perspective shows how these panics reflect ongoing, deeper anxieties about evolving gender roles, family structures, or even secularism, while psychology explains why individuals may come to believe implausible claims, particularly when memory, suggestibility, and authority are all involved. So, applying forensic psychology in these cases highlights how badly some of these investigations have gone wrong, even though that's not necessarily our lane. It's still, we can sit back and look at how these processes were influenced on the human psyche.
Absolutely. Like Monday morning quarterbacks in a
Yeah,
way.
yeah.
But it's important information to look back at that and see what our colleagues did incorrectly, 40, 45 years ago. So you could go back through time all the way to the witch trials to find where all this started. But like to find a salient point in time in the 20th century, the first allegations really was sparked by an abuse memoir entitled Michelle Remembers. Michelle Remembers became just a complete foundation and controversial book at the heart of this panic in the 1980s. And it feels integral to the beginnings of the phenomenon and the explosion because it was published in 1980. The book is co-written by Canadian psychiatrist Dr. Lawrence Pastor. Remember that name. He's going to come back into the story a couple of times. And his patient, Michelle Smith, who, guess what, Shiloh? How do you think that patient-doctor relationship ended?
At this point, we have covered a mental health professional who helped burn the eyes out of their patient with acid. So nothing surprises me
Yeah,
anymore.
exactly. Well, true. It wasn't quite like that, but it resulted in marriage.
Oh,
So,
shocking.
yes, this was 1980. It was a different time. But even as a psychiatrist, like you just don't do that. Therapists don't do it. Psychiatrists didn't do it even back then. And so clearly, Pastor was flying fast and loose with the ethical boundaries. But his book claimed to be a factual record of the repressed memories of bloody, horrific, and years long satanic ritual abuse that Smith had allegedly endured as a child in the 1950s. So, through over 600 hours of hypnosis, Pastor and Smith described elaborate rituals that involved infant sacrifice, supernatural interventions by Jesus and angels. I guess Jesus needed some backup in that. I'm not sure. There were also allegedly multi-day ceremonies held in cemeteries and underground chambers. Despite all the sensationalism, and there was a lot, including the talk show circuit, no physical evidence or corroborating witnesses supported any of the claims that were published in the book. And the claims were extensive, including hundreds of people who had allegedly marked themselves as Satanists by cutting off a finger, as well as just generating mounds of body parts from all their victims, the things that you would
Right.
notice. Hey, this is a really nice vacation spot. This is weird. Isn't it strange that like all the waiters are missing a finger?
Oh, that would be a good movie. But I mean, in all honesty, something like this, it just totally defies logic. Hundreds of people supposedly mutilating themselves, and there really is no evidence to be found. Nobody noticed or reported it at the time. And 30 years later, one person could have been found.
Exactly. And that really parallels some of the things, while it doesn't have to do with any allegations of occult ritual, the upheaval of the politics of the last couple of elections, there were allegations that in the South, that buses holding hundreds of thousands of voters from other states were coming into red states
Right.
and voting illegally. And even then, that was the question of like, so nobody got any pictures, nobody witnessed these hundreds of buses traveling at night
Yeah.
and thousands of people lining up. It just doesn't make any sense. But when the media has it on a roll, or when social media conspiracy hubs start promoting it, it just gets out of control, right? But as Maclean's journalist Paul Gresco reported, Smith's father and the extended family denied that any of the abuse ever occurred. And school records that were investigated showed no long-term absences during the supposed 81-day ritual. So critics quickly noted that the stories resembled elements of horror films, religious folklore, complete confabulation, and, interestingly enough, it also resembled descriptions of Pastor's own missionary experiences in Africa that he had written about.
Very suspicious. Well, despite the allegations, the talk show circuit press and public outcry, multiple investigations revealed numerous serious factual inconsistencies and omissions in the book, like a lot of them. So, additionally, Pastor initially accused the Church of Satan before retracting that claim under legal threat from founder Anton LaVey, who hadn't even established the organization at the time of Smith's alleged abuse.
Right.
So, just like other little things like that, aside from looking at the school records, which I think was a great way to kind of go back and investigate perhaps something from the 50s. But skeptical researchers, including Care Kuhalain and psychologist Nicholas Spanos, documented how none of Smith's abusers were ever identified or prosecuted, as well as discovering her yearbook photos showing her attending school, again, without interruption. Conveniently, the book also failed to mention Smith's two sisters or explain why, after the revelation of the abuse, that law enforcement was never, ever contacted. Later, authors, including James R. Lewis in the Oxford Handbook of New Religious Movements, concluded that much of the book was likely influenced by West African ritual stereotypes and lacked any credible verification. Despite the evidence discrediting it, the book was widely promoted in mainstream media, including People magazine, The National Enquirer, and The Oprah Winfrey Show, where Smith appeared unchallenged in 1989.
Yeah, I have a mixed relationship with Oprah. There are so many things over the years that I appreciate that she's done, but in those early days when
Oh,
it
yeah.
was the shock television, there were some real missteps
Oh, yeah,
that,
I
and
agree.
this was one of them. We really not minimize what cultural impact the book Michelle Remembers had. It just lit a match to gasoline in an explosion of accusations, even known to have been cited in courtroom testimony, featured in a 1985 episode of 2020, and used in police training seminars across North America. Several of the self-proclaimed occult experts from those years profited off books and expensive seminars that they sold across the country. Clearly, just carpetbagging con men and
Oh, yeah.
women coming in promoting themselves as experts in this area. Pazder even served as a consultant in the McMartin preschool trial, further illustrating the self-fulfilling prophecy of these horrible accusations. And it was documented in the 2023 film Satan Wants You by Sean Horler and Steve J. Adams that the book's legacy helped lay the groundwork for conspiracy theories like Pizzagate and QAnon. Despite thorough debunking by journalists and scholars, Michelle Remembers remains a cautionary tale, but not for malicious demonic cults, but more about how pseudoscience suggestibility and media amplification can trigger a widespread moral panic, one that has upturned and devastated lives, undermined trust in the legal system, and it continued to fuel enduring myths of conspiracies. In the discussion of a few cases, we have the first one entitled Faith Chapel, and this was San Diego's first exoneration. In one of the most controversial legal episodes of the 1990s, Dale Akiki, a 36-year-old volunteer at Faith Chapel Church in Spring Valley, he was accused in 1991 of sexually abusing and terrorizing children in a church nursery program. He was jailed without bail for over 2 years while prosecutors developed a case rooted in increasingly bizarre allegations, despite being his lifelong diagnosis with Noonan syndrome, as well as just being clearly visibly disabled. Children ages 3 to 5 testified that it conducted ritualistic abuse that included drinking animal blood, dunking them in toilets, and even killing animals, including an elephant and a giraffe, inside the classroom.
Hmm.
So these claims lacked any physical evidence, of course, but nonetheless, the case was pursued despite an initial deputy prosecutor declining to file charges. Sounds like a smart prosecutor.
Yeah.
According to testimony, San Diego County District Attorney Ed Miller reopened the case following pressure from Jackson R. Goodall Jr., who was a prominent businessman and chair of a local child abuse prevention foundation. Goodall's organization had financial ties to lead prosecutor Mary Avery, raising serious concerns of prosecutorial overreach and conflicts of interest. The trial began in early 1993 and became the longest in San Diego County history, lasting 7.5 months and including testimony from nearly 170 witnesses. Akiki's defense attorneys, public defenders Kathleen Coyne and Susan Clemens, argued that the children were manipulated by parents and therapists, a position the jury ultimately found credible. Jurors deliberated for just 7 hours before acquitting Akiki on all 35 charges of abuse and kidnapping, with several jurors expressing disbelief in the children's testimony and concluding the abuse never happened at all. As reported by the Los Angeles Times in a piece by Michael Granberry with contributions from Tony Perry, the case became emblematic of the broader 1980s to 1990s satanic panic. In this era where fabricated memories and social hysteria continued to fuel these prosecutions across the country, Akiki's trial outcome further sparked public scrutiny of child abuse investigations, media influence, and the justice system's vulnerability to political and emotional pressures. Ritual abuse and other alleged occult-related cases hinged on sensational allegations rather than solid evidence. And this is why the work of forensic psychologists and memory researchers, such as Dr. Elizabeth Loftus, have played a vital role in challenging these claims using solid research. Loftus's experiments and research has demonstrated how suggestive and really bad interviewing, as well as hypnosis, could implant false memories, which then leads witnesses to confabulate or create ever increasing sensationalistic details. The suggestive and leading nature of the questions create an emotional token economy in the patient that provides a fertile ground for fantasy. In many of the transcripts from the McMartin preschool hearing, you can hear the evaluator, the supposed therapist, telling the client, the child, don't you want to be helpful?
Mm.
Don't you want to help us out here? Give us an answer. It's really
Jeez.
chilling to listen all these years later. So, this feels like a direct nexus to our previous episode on false confessions, where we went in depth on the susceptibility of children and vulnerable adults who have all been shown to be open to suggestion. But even non vulnerable adults can fall prey to this as well.
Yes, that's why I'm really excited to cover this next case. So, this is a case of role reversal. This is an incident known as the Ingram case, and it was widely covered and popularized by the New Yorker magazine. We mentioned this one very briefly in our last episode on true versus false confessions and just knew that we had to explore it more here. This case is often referred to as the flagship case in recovered memory controversies. So let's get into this one. It is wild. In 1988, in Olympia, Washington, 43-year-old Paul Ingram was accused by his adult daughters of perpetrating long-term sexual abuse, and in one case, satanic ritual abuse. Paul was a former Olympia deputy. He was also the civil chief of the Thurston Sheriff's Department. He was the Republican Party chairman of Thurston County and a devout member of the Church of Living Water. Initially, Ingram had no memory of these events. But let's back up and talk about how his daughters came to remember this abuse. During the summer of 1988, Paul and his wife Sandy's daughters, Erica and Julie, were working as camp counselors at a church camp that they had attended as adolescents for years. But this was a special summer where they were going back as counselors. And on the last day of the retreat, the church had a woman named Carla Franco speak. And this woman was kind of a pseudo celebrity in the mega church circles at the time. She had done some acting. She had also spent a lot of time doing these talks at religious institutions where she sort of performed by receiving prophetic visions. And she gets up there. She starts doing her thing in front of the women and girls at this camp.
I just wanted to see what she looked like.
Of
If
course
she's
you
still
did.
around. Of course, because I'm looking her up. Of course, she's probably still around. I truly miss my calling. I don't have the energy to run a cult. One-off prophetic visions and maybe speaking in tongues. That could
Yeah,
be my retirement gig, right?
totally. I see it.
Yeah, okay.
For sure.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know if you have that gift, but so the Holy Spirit starts telling Franco that some of the girls there that day have been victims of sexual abuse. So, I mean, I think no shit, if we just look at the stats, of course, 1 in 4 girls are going to be victims of abuse.
Right.
But then she starts describing terrifying scenes as if she's seeing them. Like, I see somebody hiding in a closet, and then a light is seen underneath a closed door to a bedroom. And then a perpetrator comes in and she, tells these girls, paints the scene for them and says, there is someone here who was molested as a young girl, perhaps by a relative. And while this is going on, one by one, these poor girls start bursting into tears. Girls start running out of the room. Some pop up and say, that was me. I mean, traumatic stuff. I'm not saying
Yeah.
like every girl in this camp, but many are having these really strong reactions. One girl is so triggered, she runs to the restroom and tries to drown herself in the toilet by putting her head in the toilet. Thankfully, a counselor follows her, stops her. Many girls end up disclosing to their counselors that day that they had been sexually abused as children. I mean, what a way to end the camp season, huh?
Well,
Jeez.
yeah, I mean, that to me is fascinating. And again, this is another sort of information point that we don't have time to dive into, but it would be interesting to talk about the type of bonding that happens when kids go to summer camps.
Mm,
Kids have a different perception of time.
yeah.
And when they're in an environment that fosters socializing, you can be with your camp comrades for a handful of days and feel like you've known them all your life. Now, that's not a bad thing, but it can also, in situations like this is a match to a fire. All of them feeling very close. They're all having a shared experience. And then this, hypomanic, self-proclaimed prophet starts doing a cold reading of a room, except
Yep.
I don't think she's like a fake clairvoyant. She really believes what she's saying.
Sure. Sure. Yeah. But so as they start wrapping up things for the day, they're starting to like dust girls off and like put them on buses to go home. 22-year-old Erica Ingram is sitting in a corner crying. So some friends go up to her, try to comfort her. Carla Franco joins the small group and she goes up to Erica and says, Erica, the Holy Spirit is telling me that you're a victim of sexual abuse. Erica, is your dad the one that's been abusing you? And now Erica's just sobbing and nods her head in agreement. So it's interesting, just as we look at all these cases, of course, not going down a victim blaming rabbit hole, but to also bring to light past behavior, which we know is a good predictor of future behavior. Erica had previously made other allegations of sexual abuse, including in previous years at this church retreat. In 1983, she reported that one of the church counselors had raped her. In 1985, both she and her sister, Julie, claimed that a neighbor had molested them. And despite their father being in law enforcement, no charges were ever made in either of those situations. So when Erica and Julie returned from the retreat, both of them, so Julie was 18 at the time, both of them like immediately move out of the family home really abruptly, very little contact with the family afterwards. And then around Thanksgiving, the family gets back together. There were other siblings as well, all adults, but they eventually tell their mom about the abuse and they all go to the police to report it. I just want to say shout out to the Cult Leader podcast, who does an awesome episode on this
Yeah.
case. Please go listen to it. Spencer's research is just absolutely top notch, and it's an entertaining deep dive.
Paul was first questioned by Sheriff Edward and Under Sheriff Neil McClanahan. At that time, he had waived his right to an attorney, and then by detectives in charge of sex abuse cases in the Thurston County Sheriff's Department in Olympia, Washington. And this all took place on November 28th, 1988. He essentially says he doesn't recall any abuse, but he also doesn't want to doubt his daughters. He was taken into custody without bail and kept in solitary confinement for his own protection as a former law enforcement officer, which makes a lot of sense. Over the next several months, he was interrogated on numerous occasions by an interrogation team that included both law enforcement officers and, on 2 occasions, a psychologist hired by the prosecution. Now, under this intense interrogation and suggestive questioning, he began to, quote unquote, recover vivid memories and put forth increasingly bizarre confessions. And not surprisingly at all, the law enforcement and hired guns used techniques from the now discredited recovery memory therapy, also known as RMT. Before being scientifically discredited, RMT utilized techniques like hypnosis, guided imagery, and dream interpretation, all clearly very scientific
Yes,
procedures, right?
as
And they were
indicated by
used
my eye rolls right now.
exactly to access these alleged repressed memories. So for Paul Ingram, these memories included claims of participating in satanic rituals, baby sacrifices, and forced abortions, none of which were supported by any physical evidence or independent witnesses. His confessions continued to expand under pressure despite inconsistencies, contradictions, and he ultimately pled guilty to multiple counts of third-degree rape. Ingram later tried to withdraw his plea, asserting his confessions were coerced and false, but the court denied his appeal. He served 14 years and was released in 2003.
Yeah, so this might be like a nerdy part of the piece that I added into this account of what went on, but I found a forensic psychologist that used to head up the Society for Criminal and Police Psychology, Kenneth Pope. He was the president forever, just writes beautifully, dissects cases beautifully as a forensic psychologist. And I found some articles on his website about this particular case. So I'm going to include it here for all the nerds. But very interestingly, in 1989, so several months after Ingram had been taken into custody, Richard Offshee, a sociologist, was hired as a consultant by the prosecution and joined this interrogation team that's now going. I'm like, they truly did need a team if they're interrogating him for months. Like, what is happening here? So during his first day on the case, Offshee began to suspect that Paul was not confessing to crimes he had actually committed, but was self-inducing a trance and imagining crimes suggested to him. Like, okay, good. Day one, you spot that something is fishy. So what Offshee did is he decided to test Ingram's susceptibility by falsely telling him that his children had accused him of incest between the siblings. He told Ingram, go pray about this tonight, come back tomorrow, and we'll talk about it. So he was essentially making something up to see if Paul would then cop to it. Sure enough,
it's 1989. That is a little like, here's a person that you are already suspecting may be wildly traumatized.
Yeah.
And then you're adding in another. I understand wanting to test it, but wow.
It is. And, this was just kind of willy-nilly on day one of talking with him, where
clearly
maybe there's some sort of part of an evaluation where things like this can be tested without now tainting evidence or confessions. So sure enough, Paul Ingram came back the next day admitting to making his children engage in sexual acts. So this fabricated confession, despite having no factual basis, convinced Offshee that Ingram's previous admissions were similarly manufactured. Offshee concluded that the inadvertent use of hypnosis during Ingram's interrogation, which was supposedly a result of the relaxation techniques used on day 2 of the interrogations by that psychologist, when coupled with the influence exerted by authority figures, induced these false memories of abusing his daughters and subsequently convincing Paul of his own guilt. Unfortunately, this held little weight for the courts when Paul ended up pleading guilty. We could really do a whole other episode as to why mental health professionals should not be actively used in investigative interrogations. There's a lot of blurry lines around roles, ethics, causing harm. I think there is some case law out of Southern California where a psychologist actually participated in interrogating a suspect on a criminal case. There's also a lot of interesting research around psychologists working in the military in terms of like war crimes.
Yeah.
Can't go down that rabbit hole today, but this is a huge ethical area that needs a lot of caution. Consultant, okay. But how much are you influencing what the police work is when that's not your job? So this case also remains a cautionary tale about how faulty psychological practices and panic can distort justice. Although some see this as a situation where Offshee effectively discredited the accused father's confession by showing how vulnerable it was to coercion and suggestion, there were some harsh findings in the courts regarding credibility. So I'm actually going to quote this straight from Kenneth Pope's website, which is in our resources. Quote, it was noted that Offshee, identifying himself as a social psychologist or as a sociologist having a specialty in social psychology, is not permitted under the laws of the state of Washington to make any diagnosis or perform any therapy or treatment. Additionally, Judge Peterson found Offshee to be considerably less qualified to give opinions in this area than the other expert witnesses, all of whom had been hired by the defense to evaluate Ingram and disagreed with Offshee's conclusions. Ingram's own retained psychological expert, Dr. Lennon, indicated that Mr. Ingram was a pedophile who was badly in need of treatment. Judge Peterson thought that the Ingram investigation was not perfect, but did not taint the confession. As a result, the judge refused to set aside Ingram's guilty pleas. So this is a tricky one for me. It is so muddy. so muddy. I feel like the truth will never really be known. You have a psychologist that seemingly did an evaluation and said he was, met a criteria for pedophilic disorder back then. However, I mean, again, as previously mentioned, our patron saint of eyewitness testimony, Elizabeth Loftus, said this was one of the most dramatic cases of false memory of abuse that was ever to be documented.
Well, no, I'm glad you point that out, that it's muddied, because there are some things that feel a little squeegee, but it's also looking at it through a distorted lens. Like, part of me wants to think, like, what seasoned law enforcement officer or deputy would fall prey to something like that? But then again, people fall prey to things. I feel like the level of expertise that we have today, I mean, not you and I, we have a
Mhm.
level of expertise, but there are people out there who are actively doing this kind of work every single day
Yeah.
in court evaluations and this particular stuff that is directly related to the legal proceedings. It just seems like this would not happen today. I feel like there's a whole wealth of information that we don't have when his own evaluator, or as they call it, quote unquote, psychological expert, that Dr. Lennon, he's diagnosing Ingram as a pedophile who was badly in need of treatment. Well, what is that based on? Like, that's a wild statement,
Well, yeah. I mean,
you
I
know?
don't know if an evaluation was done because that's not there. So if he's just saying that, then he's just saying that. But I think it needs to be parsed out. You can't have psychologists helping you with a confession. You can have them do evaluations. Like, please
Right,
do.
right.
But let's keep it separate.
Yeah, absolutely. And, yeah, it just speaks a lot to the problems with credibility in situations like this. But thank you very much for also pulling out Loftus's statement about this being so significant in the history of false memory of accusations. So a shift finally starts to happen, and let's talk about the experts who fueled this hysteria. During the height of satanic panic, courts brought in people claiming to be specialists in occult crime or recovered memory therapy, many of whom had zero scientific basis for any of their claims, zero real expertise. Folks like Lawrence Pastor, he's a psychiatrist, a medical doctor who prescribes medication. And frankly, many of the psychiatrists back in the day were rarely trained in any type of therapeutic orientations for their treatment models. He actually sat on the stand and testified that elaborate underground cult networks were real, despite no credible evidence ever surfacing. Other self appointed occult consultants like Jolene Buckley made careers out of connecting anything remotely weird to satanic conspiracies. And then this helped prosecutors spin really fantastical allegations into court cases. And unfortunately, at the same time, therapists were using recovered memory techniques like hypnosis, guided imagery, suggestive questioning, that the American Psychological Association would later warn are highly likely to create false memories. Media like 2020 and Oprah, as we mentioned before, gave them huge platforms because it was so fantastical. It was one of those things that was guaranteed to bring in an audience when you made claims like this.
Totally.
And of course, this again just amplified public panic and made it nearly impossible for jurors to tell the difference between science and pseudoscience.
And, I can appreciate an investigator saying, whoa, this is new territory. We need to bring in an expert to help us understand this. And that's fine. I think, it probably feels like in this day and age, there is no new territory. Of course, there's still going to be new territory,
Always.
but it was also new territory to us as psychologists and researchers at one time, right? And maybe something pops up like this that is new to all different professions. It
Right.
is on the experts to lay those boundaries and say, we just don't know about this yet. There's not enough research about this yet. I'm sorry I can't be helpful, rather than jumping on the stand and making some shit up, or, having your ego played to so much that like now you're going to be the spokesperson for something that is either pseudoscience or there is no science that exists yet for it.
Yeah.
So, and on one hand, like I do not fault the investigators who are like bringing people on their team thinking they're doing the right thing. It's on the various subject matter experts to draw the line where their limitations are. But after so many wrongful prosecutions came to light in this era, the justice system finally started to course correct. One big shift was how investigators interviewed children. Researchers like Stephen Ceci and Maggie Bruck published landmark studies showing how easily kids' memories can be manipulated by repetitive leading questions. That's when best practices like the NICHD investigative interview protocol came into play, basically a structured method to ask kids open-ended questions without planting ideas. Sounds like we should do that with adults, like we talked about in
Yeah.
episode 208. That came out. Meanwhile, forensic psychologists and legal scholars pushed for videotaping all interrogations so there would be a record of exactly what was said and how it was said.
Yep.
And as the science piled up, recovered memory therapy started to lose credibility as an investigative tool, with courts becoming far more skeptical about admitting testimony based on quote unquote memories recovered under hypnosis. These reforms didn't erase the damage, but they did help build safeguards. So it's a lot harder to create false memories and more like in the courtroom today.
But it wasn't all bad actors. And as we mentioned before, there were some experts that were essential in pushing back on this panic. Of course, Elizabeth Loftus, like we've mentioned before, she did these groundbreaking experiments showing how easy it is to implant detailed false memories in people. She actually does it. I mean, I'm not sure if she's still teaching, but she was
Yeah.
legendary in San Diego. For one thing, very popular professor. People were always crowded into her class. And
UC
she
Irvine.
was it UC Irvine? Okay.
That's where she's at.
But she would do an experiment with her first year students and tell them right up front, I'm going to implant a false memory in you. And people would say, no, you're not going to. And by the end of that session, they would all have like a common one about not liking strawberry ice cream because something
Yes,
awful had
something like
happened.
that.
So Loftus herself is not without some controversy, but a lot of that controversy comes from the fact that she is so firmly on the side of evidence that her detractors say, no, you have to have some wiggle room. We have to understand that there is some nuance. There is this possibility. And it's resulted in a lot of lawsuits against her, but her work has been cited again and again to challenge recovered memory claims that continue to come up in court. And there's an association of therapists here in Southern California that is very big into helping. Specifically, they work with clients who allege years of ritual abuse.
Yes.
But that's another episode that we will never do. We
No,
won't.
thank you.
Nope.
Another contributing factor to experts asserting their observations and research was when FBI Special Agent Kenneth Lanning of the Behavioral Analysis Unit published his 1992 Guide for Investigating Ritual Abuse. Right off the bat in this guide, he discloses how the insane amount of claims made in such a short period of time throughout the 80s could not possibly be true. Like every other person in the world would be a perpetrator. He published a guide that straight up says there is no evidence for these so-called satanic cults and these intergenerational satanic cults, and lays it all out, even though he knows, especially in 1992, these investigations are going to continue to come across people's desks.
Yeah.
So Lanning goes on to assert his concern that actual child abuse victims are at risk of not being believed if there is no satanic element to the account. So this was so prevalent in this era that he was worried that if they didn't say it was this crazy ritual thing, that nobody would pay attention to them. His guide walks investigators through a systematic way to follow the evidence in cases that are initially presented as ritual abuse of children. And our friend Rebecca Sebastian had a lovely conversation with Mr. Lanning in episode 7 of the podcast Devil and the Deep Blue Sea, which I mentioned briefly in our last forensic episode. So we'll link that if you guys haven't listened to that yet. It's fantastic.
And this was a big deal because it came from the FBI and it helped prosecutors and judges realize that these cases were built on stories and they were not built on facts. Finally, the media started to catch on. PBS Frontline's program that was entitled Innocence Lost dove into how the Little Rascals daycare case unraveled because of bad interviewing and wild expert claims. Over time, solid research and credible expert testimony did what the panic couldn't. It brought the courts back to reality. You know, it's a reminder that forensic psychology, when applied carefully and appropriately, can help prevent or correct some of the worst injustices that have been fueled by fear. Unfortunately, it cycles back around.
Yeah.
It's never going to be laid to rest because there's going to be some new permutation in today's world that comes up every few months.
Then in 1994, researchers out of the University of California, Davis conducted a massive nationwide study on ritual and satanic abuse. The study, which surveyed over 11,000 psychiatric workers and police officers across the country, found that out of more than 12,000 accusations of group cult sexual abuse based on satanic ritual, not one could be substantiated with any hard evidence. The study concluded that there was no evidence for the existence of a well-organized intergenerational satanic cult who sexually molested and tortured children. However, researchers did find the evidence of lone individuals or sometimes couples who may use satanic themes to intimidate victims, but this was kind of the best that they could find.
That's a tenuous connection, right?
Yeah. The study was then submitted to the National Center of Child Abuse and Neglect, who was responsible for publishing these findings. The study's findings were significant in challenging the widespread belief in a nationwide network of satanic groups involved in child abuse, which had been fueled by all of this sensationalistic press coverage that we've been talking about at the time.
When expert testimony successfully undermines the foundation of these ritual abuse claims, the courts can begin to push back. And they did. They started pushing back really strongly on these alleged prosecutions or attempted prosecutions that were rooted just in moral panic rather than any credible evidence. So, scholarly reviews of these trials clearly conclude that moral panics distort prosecutorial focus, emphasizing sensational narrative rather than looking at the objective proof. And that ultimately will just erode trust in the legal system, which is not something any of us need now, but clearly it's happening. After these decisions, legal reforms began to emerge. Courts increasingly required taped or expert reviewed interviews with child witnesses, and they started scrutinizing recovered memory techniques more vigorously. In fact, they did it so vigorously that it's just like a no-go anymore. Recovered memory, don't even bring it up in a court proceeding these days. These verdicts illustrate that from a forensic psychology standpoint, moral panics can catalyze miscarriages of justice, but also that careful scientific analysis can help restore that balance. Right?
Indeed. Yeah. But it still sneaks in here and there.
Yeah.
In the Delphi trial, we saw the defense try and use the occult as a possible third-party culpability defense. In the trial of Richard Allen for the 2017 double homicide of Abby Williams and Libby German in Delphi, Indiana, a striking defense narrative emerged in late 2023, even way before the trial. This was something that they were openly putting out into the press to steer the narrative already. They alleged that the murders were part of a Nordic occult ritual. Allen's defense attorneys claimed that the killings were carried out as part of an Odinist or Norse pagan sacrifice, supposedly performed by unidentified white supremacist cult members. The claim was based in part on the positioning of the bodies, the presence of sticks arranged in supposedly symbolic patterns, and alleged runic inscriptions. The defense team introduced this theory to cast doubt on Allen's guilt by suggesting the involvement of a ritualistic group motivated by esoteric pagan beliefs rather than Allen himself. These claims were included in legal filings and, of course, gained attention for their resemblance to satanic panic era blame involving occult overtones and ritualistic interpretations.
And let's set the record straight on this because it has come up a lot in social media and discussion boards about this trial. Yes, there has been a resurgence of Norse pagan and heathen traditions in the US, but also in the Nordic regions themselves, including some that are called Odinism. But the rise of traditional pagan religions and spiritual beliefs, it's been happening for decades, and it appears to be a cycle that reflects a lot of modern discomfort with the judgmental nature of the more established organized religions. So if you look at any research in this, modern Odinists usually focus on honoring the old Norse gods, Odin, Thor, Freya, And they do this through practices like seasonal festivals. They offer rituals called bliots and community gatherings known as symbols. And these are basically ceremonies where people share toasts, stories, and oaths. It sounds like a great party, right? Drinking and talking and hanging out. But now some extremist groups have tried to hijack these symbols that the Odinists have used traditionally for their own agendas. A lot of this stems from the idea that the Vikings were all a bunch of white guys and white gals. Like the Viking was like sort of a name as a soldier. It wasn't a denotion of your ethnic heritage. Basically, anybody that joined them was a Viking. But white supremacists have co-opted a lot of the symbols, and that's really sad. But the vast majority of people who are actually practicing Norse paganism today are just connecting to cultural heritage and spirituality, not anything violent at all. And here's the key point. Credible historians like Neil Price, who wrote The Viking Way, and H.R. Ellis Davidson have found no real evidence that these traditions ever involved systematic human sacrifice, and certainly nothing like the ritual murder stories that pop up in modern criminal cases. So when you hear somebody say that a cult committed human sacrifice, that assertion is based in conspiracy theory rather than historical fact. And also sounds like sort of a desperate Hail Mary, thrown at the very end by the defense team.
So Allen was convicted of the murders earlier this year because in part prosecutors did reject the Odinist cult theory as, it was being unfounded and speculative and emphasizing more the presence of the minimal direct evidence in this case, as well as the confessions by Allen. Legal scholars and forensic psychologists have expressed concern that invoking occult themes in high-profile cases Legal scholars and forensic psychologists have expressed concern that invoking occult themes in high-profile cases can cloud juror reasoning.
So these types of themes have been covered over and over again in entertainment over the years. And there's been some really good ones recently. There's some great classic ones that actually started in the 80s. And there's one actually that we'll talk about in a second that probably was a precursor to it. But right now out on Netflix, I believe there's a great French film called Hood Witch. And here's the description. Noor is a single mother who makes a living by smuggling exotic animals and illicit products from other countries. She's accused of witchcraft after a man's death and then finds herself on the run from an angry mob that chases her through the city streets. Again, it's a French film. It is fictional at all. This is happening around the world, continues to happen in many African countries where superstition is still very high. Even children, if something goes wrong, children can be accused of witchcraft and either lose their lives horribly or they're exiled from the communities and have to live outside the city. This is not a phenomenon that's going away. It is always something that pops up. This film looks really good. But there's some other examples as well.
Yeah, we're going to give you some other quick hits if you just want to see them. But I want to geek out for a second because I love this series. It's the Fear Street series. It's the Fear Street series or trilogy that's on Netflix. It's a supernatural slasher anthology adapted from R.L. Stein's YA books, his horror novels. So, of course, we know him for Goosebumps.
For Goosebumps, yeah. The light stuff.
Yes, but these are definitely geared more towards young adults. So all three films were shot in 2019, but they were released consecutively in July of 2021. Creating this very binge-friendly post-COVID experience for folks. But these are so good. So I think of it as like Scream meets Stranger Things meets nostalgic 70s horror films. And my daughter had watched them back then because she's definitely into horror films. And so we just sat down and watched these like a month ago. We totally binged them all in one day. But in Fear Street Part 1, I'm not going to give away any spoilers. Part 1 takes place in 1994, which I loved because the whole soundtrack was like the soundtrack to my life when I was a junior in high school. And you're introduced to this group of teens in the city of Shadyside. They confront a killer and uncover this centuries-old curse tied to witchcraft there in the town. In Fear Street Part 2, that one takes place in 1978, which I was like, okay, again, another great year. That's when I was born. And this one is like that summer camp theme where a few of the same characters from part one are there when they're younger, because it's going backwards, and they continue to kind of trace the curse's history. And then Fear Street Part 3 goes all the way back to 1666 to Puritan times, and we get to see the origins of the curse. And then it kind of flips forward again to 1994 when they try to break this curse. This one, Part 3, has all of the same actors from the first two playing new characters, so it kind of gives you that like American Horror Story anthology vibe. Highly recommend. Please put it on your summer watch list. It would be so fun to watch, especially, if you have a teenager or someone else in the house that like loves stuff like this. Very good. They came out with a fourth one recently that takes place in the 80s that is not of the same storyline, and it kind of sucks. I wanted it to be good because it was 80s, but it was more like way campy. And yeah, I think everyone should check it out. You should watch it, Scott.
So I think that's an interesting choice that you made there, because you're actually sharing something that was really fun to watch. And it, is a fictional story about an actual occult thing. I'm glad that you included that, because those are the types of things that really do influence the satanic panic now. But back in my day, way before you were born, there were, in my day, folks,
now that we've established the year I was born.
I know. But let me just tell you, like, there was a time
Tell
back in the
us,
day,
Uncle Scott.
there was a time when all three networks, before cable, or if you were rich enough to afford cable, there were just three networks. There were NBC, CBS, and ABC. All of them had movies of the week, and some of the horror movies that they produced, it wasn't all horrors. Some would be comedies, some would be dramatics. But when they did horror movies, to this day, some of them are the most terrifying things ever. There was one with Shelley Winters and Linda Pearl called The Initiation of Sarah, which was terrifying.
Oh my gosh.
Morgan Brittany and Morgan Fairchild were in it.
Ooh.
I remember there was another one that was later made into a feature film movie about this family that moves into a house and the vents are blocked off because there are these monsters. And it was absolutely terrifying. You can't believe it was on broadcast television. Like, it was traumatizing and wonderful. But they played a role in giving kids and the viewing public the idea of what satanic rituals were supposed to look like. And satanic rituals, there really wasn't anything.
Right.
Like, the Hollywood is making the shit up as they go, right?
Well, and because those were so successful, do you remember Disney tried to get in on the action with Watcher in the Woods?
Oh, terrifying, by the way.
Betty Davis. Like,
yeah.
What? I was just telling my daughter about it last night, and we found the trailer, and she was like, what is this?
And it's got a great twist in it. Like, it's
terrifying.
Supernatural, science fiction, all sorts of stuff. But a big one, and this is a major one, was a movie starring Tom Hanks that was a made-for-TV movie called Mazes and Monsters. And this one was a little bit meta because it was about satanic panic, because at this time, Dungeons and Dragons was getting to be really huge and parents were flipping out. And they shouldn't have been flipping out, because let me tell you, playing Dungeons and Dragons is incredibly good for building team skills, creativity. I mean, there's just been studies over the decades showing how good it is for socialization of children and even adults. Like, there are celebrities that play Dungeons and Dragons. But this one was interestingly about a guy who's playing it on a college campus, but they're, playing it in the tunnels underneath the academic buildings. And it's sort of indicated that Tom Hanks's character is like a little bit mentally unstable, and then he has a break and he can't really tell what is real and what isn't, and it all ends horribly. But of course, the public misinterpreted what the message was, and it wasn't the game that drove him crazy. It was a person who was mentally unwell. So this one really was sort of the granddaddy of getting pulled into that. It wasn't just a dramatization of occult rituals. It was the idea that these satanic influences are around us in these insidious ways, including games that we play.
Interesting. Yeah. And then if you want, like, of course, a Lifetime movie, She Fought Alone came out in 1995, and it depicts how a small town turns on a teenage girl who claims assault. It reflects moral panic more broadly, akin to how communities handled satanic allegations, a lot of victim blaming, scapegoating, institutional denial, all of the above. There is also a documentary about the Paul Ingram story. It's called Paul, the Secret Story of Olympia's Satanic Sheriff. Very salacious title there. It's done out of Canada. I could not find where to watch it. I couldn't find it anywhere. So didn't get a chance to see how it was done. But I thought it would be interesting, especially after researching the story, and I came away from it going, ooh, I don't know if he did this or not.
And when we find it, we'll post it in the links.
Yeah, for sure. But, as we close out, I came across a really great article by Vox called Why Satanic Panic Never Really Ended. I feel like that's kind of how we are feeling right now, is like closing out this episode. We can definitely point to a period of time decades ago where it was rampant and not well understood. I mean, that's been done over and over again in true crime. But with the rise of the new apostolic reformation, essentially the idea that leaders are divinely chosen to shape society, and how that is so deeply embedded in people's identities and ideologies now, I just don't know how we can't have things happen and phenomenon like QAnon and Pizzagate, or people losing their shit because Little Nas X is giving a lap dance to the devil in his music video. Like, this is coming up over and over again now. And as we said at the top of this, I don't know what they're going to call it many moons from now, but pay attention, you guys, and know it for what it is when you see it.
Yeah, I mean, I have no doubt that the people who listen to us, and we know this because we're in contact with so many of you folks,
Sure.
is like we have listeners that engage in critical thinking, and they may not, you may not agree with us all the time, which I completely understand. And we want to always have discussion and discourse. But the idea that people have critical thinking, which means the process of criticizing your own thinking processes and leaving room for doubt, is a special gift these days, because it's not common, really isn't. It's like my grandmother saying, common sense ain't common. When people allow themselves to sit in ignorance rather than going, there's another old saying, don't depend on somebody telling you whether it's raining or not. Go and look out the window. Do actual research. And unfortunately, people don't know what actual research is. I don't know if it ever goes away unless we start holding people. I mean, there are also bad actors that want things like this stirred up because they benefit from shit being stirred all the time. And this is something that my friend Steve and I have conversations about all the time. He's a really gifted analyst that I went to school with. And we talk about the mechanics of shame. And there's a lot of talk in our field over the decades about toxic shame. Right. Toxic shame is absolutely debilitating and crippling to individual development and society. But there's also room for shame in acknowledging that you are doing something wrong. And I know that there's a difference between shame and guilt. I understand that. But shame is admitting to yourself, I stood in this place and made judgment and engaged in actions that were wrong because I chose not to look. I think that somehow we've got to implement that back into our public discourse, but that's my soapbox.
Yeah, no, I agree. You mentioned a term way back when we started this episode, coined by a couple of researchers, called media amplification spirals. And I think if anything could sort of apply to all of us, and I've been talking with a lot of clients lately about social media spirals with, some of the things that they've been soaking up and are very concerned about. I think that term could apply probably from here on to eternity with the way that we consume media. But if anything, as we've said many times before, just make sure you guys are taking care of yourself. If you are consuming something that is making you feel shitty or depressed, maybe some time away from it is a good thing. And, it doesn't have to be forever. You can still stay informed, seek out those types of media that can inform you without making you feel bad about yourself for long periods of time or just bad about the world. But yeah. All right. Well, anything else, Dr. Scott, for today?
I think that's it. Thank you so much for being so patient with this. You, Dr. Shiloh, being so patient with this long ass episode that
you crafted.
Got so happy about.
For sure. All right, everyone. Well, with that, we will see you next time on LA
Not So
Confidential. Bye, guys.
Bye, folks.
We sincerely thank you for spending some time with us today. LA Not So Confidential is part of Alienist Entertainment and the Crawl Space Media Network. Each episode is hosted, produced, and written by Dr. Scott and Dr. Shiloh. Our post-production editing and sweetening magic is handled by the multi-talented Jason Usry of Ear Cult Productions.
Our theme music, entitled Cool Vibes Film Noir, is composed and performed by the talented Kevin MacLeod. He graciously allows us to use his music via a Creative Commons Attribution license. Please check out all of Kevin's amazing work on YouTube.
All of the resources for each episode can be found on our website at www.la-not-so-confidential.com. You can find us on Blue Sky and Instagram at LA Not So Podcast. On TikTok, Facebook, and YouTube, we are at LA Not So Confidential. Media inquiries and bookings are scheduled at alienistentertainment@gmail.com.
Once a month, we go live on YouTube on a Saturday afternoon, so stay tuned to our social media announcements to join our interactive broadcast entitled Behind the Couch, where we interview guests on a number of psych, criminal justice, and true crime topics.
And lastly, we'd be honored if you joined our Patreon at patreon.com/LA Not So Podcast. With a subscription, you get an ad-free listening experience, additional content, host interaction, and you'll be the first to know about upcoming live events, social gatherings, and super cool merch.
So thanks for listening, and join us next time on LA
Not So
Confidential.